I'm Nadia Taylor, Training and Exercise Manager for the Readiness Support Center. And this is Semper Gumby, a podcast about emergency management in the Corps of Engineers. We'll cover topics about disaster response and recovery, FEMA mission assignments, and Corps-specific response authorities under which we operate for things like flood fighting and coastal emergencies. Today we're going to be talking about the Cascadia Subduction Zone, and we have with us two CSZ gurus. We have John Leighow and Jennifer Chang. So John, we'll start with you. What do you do for the Corps?
I am currently the Chief of the Readiness and Contingency Operations for Northwest Division.
And Jennifer, how about you?
I am the Civil Emergency Planner at Northwestern Division, and we're in Portland, Oregon.
All right, guys. Well, let's start at square one here. What is the Cascadia Subduction Zone?
The Cascadia Subduction Zone is a very long fault. It is in the Pacific Ocean, about 70 or so miles off the west coast of the United States, all the way from British Columbia in Canada, going down south to Northern California. And it has a period of recurrence around 350-ish years or so. Based on the evidence in the geologic record, right now, today, we're well within the period of recurrence. And from what we know about subduction zone earthquakes, they're always really big. Whether parts of the zone snap or the whole thing snaps, the shaking, the tsunami that it will generate will be intense from the coast, obviously, all the way into the I-5 corridor, which is maybe a couple hundred miles inland. So it will obviously have big impacts on the population of Oregon and Washington, from the coast into the major population centers of Portland and Seattle.
So, and to follow on with this, what's fascinating is that they've been able to determine when the last time this earthquake erupted based on, at some point somebody figured out this orphan tsunami wave that occurred in Japan back in the 1700s was caused by the Cascadia when it erupted. And they actually figured out the exact date was January, I think, of 1700. So, yeah, we're in the window for this event.
I feel like a lot of people in the United States know San Andreas Fault, but the Cascadia Subduction Zone is less well known, I think. But it's a hugely important thing to care about. So why should people care about the Cascadia Subduction Zone?
Actually, that's a good point. The CSZ has actually gone relatively unknown for until probably the last 20 years, and it hasn't been until the last 10 years they've actually determined, how big this thing was. So initially, they didn't think it was that big. And then as they started going through and assessing the damage, and FEMA just recently re-looked at the scope of damage based on their modeling with the USGS, and it was quite scary. Very eye-opening when you start to hear senior leaders talking about the Pacific Northwest going back to third world standards, Lewis and Clark days, essentially, in terms of the impacts to the infrastructure, technology, etc. So in terms of impacts, why should we be worried? Pacific Northwest is, just from a national economic impact, it's huge. So much of the throughput comes in and out of Tacoma, Seattle, through those ports, and of course that's also in support of Alaska. The impacts across the Pacific, as I stated earlier, this orphan tsunami wave impacting Japan, it's going to be like that across the Pacific as well. So you have life, safety, the impact to the very highly populated areas in the Pacific Northwest, economic impact to the nation, not to mention the impact across the entire Pacific Rim.
And the geography of the Pacific Northwest, especially in this scenario, will become very isolated. The Cascade Mountain Range, and there are very few east-west routes through the state of Washington and Oregon, and there's only really one major north-south road transportation network going up from California up to Washington, and those are expected to be significantly disrupted, which will make response really difficult. For the coastal populations, there's a mountain range between the I-5 corridor and the coast, and in all the models, the roads between the I-5 corridor and the coast of Washington, Oregon, all those roads are damaged heavily to the point of destroyed and unusable. So the response challenges will be very difficult for the state and federal communities to handle.
And one of the things we've done to help communicate and do comparative analysis for our senior leaders was if you were to overlay the country of Iraq into our operational area, it's roughly the same size. Northern California, the states of Oregon, Washington, it's roughly the same size as Iraq with the geographical constraints of Afghanistan with the mountains and, the very few routes that'll be available in and out. And of course, you got the water on the other side. So it isn't like New Madrid where you have 360 degrees of egress and ingress. Right here, you really really are quite limited.
Well, so that brings us to response, as you said, Jennifer, and core response. Now, I know you guys have done extensive planning for the Northwest Division in case there is an event in the CSC, but can you tell me a little bit about that? How have we planned for an event like this?
Sure. So the Corps of Engineers has two large districts in the Pacific Northwest. We have a Portland district, we have a Seattle district, and they're both large districts, 900 people plus. Based on where our employees live, we expect about 70% plus to be impacted by this event, and they're not going to be available to go to work. They'll be isolated at home, taking care of their families. So our goal in the NWD plan has been to figure out who will be able to take up those roles and responsibilities that the Portland district and Seattle district can no longer do. And we've also looked at how we're going to take care of the roles and responsibilities of the Northwestern Division office, also in Portland, but it's a much smaller office. So the Cascadia plan for the Northwestern Division is to have our Walla Walla district, which is in eastern Washington, become what we are calling a super civil works district. And they become responsible for both the Seattle and Portland district area of responsibility. And our Omaha district, which will be definitely well out of the impacted area, will take on division roles and responsibility. They'll coordinate with headquarters in Washington, D.C., they'll coordinate with our Walla Walla district, and they'll coordinate with other stakeholders to identify resources and make sure that we're able to assess the Corps of Engineers projects that are throughout the Pacific Northwest.
So if you think in terms of continuity of operations plans, most folks think of it as, okay, I just got to set up and operate from a different location. We've actually really been able to split the focus where you have COOP retain authorities and then COOP devolve authorities. Bottom line is that continuity of operations, those mission essential tasks that the districts do, the Seattle, Portland district, and Northwestern Division, those mission essential functions have to continue. So what this scenario has done, it's really forced us to look at devolvement. Who can conduct our mission essential functions and set up the framework and the structure there? So it's been a long ongoing process. Jen and the whole team at Northwestern Division and how we've approached this probably for the last, 3 years, 2.5, 3 years now. Very inward focus and learning about ourselves and doing some mission analysis of our own functions and where do we store vital records? Who has access to that? It's really opened up a lot of eyes, a lot of minds. Whereas folks were very parochial and kind of stovepiped, it's really broken down a lot of barriers.
And then there are some other missions that we have to worry about in a big event like this. How are we going to do our ESF3 missions? Kansas City District has been designated the state to respond in the state of Washington for the FEMA missions. And then we went outside of our Corps of Engineers NWD footprint, and Southwestern Division and Little Rock District will be prepared to set up the FEMA Recovery Field Office in Oregon. So this is going to be a response that requires Corps of Engineers support nationwide for both Walla Walla, looking at our civil works projects, our large dams that are in Washington and Oregon, as well as how are we going to help FEMA do their response to the state of Washington and Oregon? Obviously, we anticipate big missions like debris cleanup and infrastructure assessment and worrying about the housing for displaced people. The Corps of Engineers' role to support FEMA is definitely going to be huge.
So then that brings me kind of to my next question, because you've mentioned all of these players from across the Corps, from across the nation. How do we keep all of these people prepared and trained and up to speed in case an earthquake in the CSC happens?
So what we've already seen done in South Atlantic Division and the Mississippi Valley Division, they have annual or every 2-year type of workshops, events. Working on New Madrid. I think hurricane season has been a primary focus every year for those divisions, but that's essentially how we see this going as well. This is our first and only big effort that we've had, I would say regional effort with nationwide impact. So following the same line of thinking and activity that MVD has done for New Madrid, probably do the same thing every 2 years or so. This is not a fire and forget type of plan, put it up on the shelf, let it collect dust. It can't. There's too many moving parts and pieces to this. And as we stated earlier, we're in the window now. Chances are, I think we saw about, there's within the next 50 years or so.
30% chance of it happening in the next 50 years?
Yeah, 30% chance. So, I mean, I don't go to Vegas and bet a lot of money because I always lose. So that's not something I'm willing to do here. And quite honestly, I think we have strong leadership support on this too. That's very key in making sure this happens.
And we're also looking at maintaining the employee training down at the project level, doing comms drills, making sure they know how to use their sat phones so that a dam that is in Central Oregon knows how to use their sat phone and call Walla Walla District and let them know, hey, things are fine, or, oh, we have a problem. That employee level training is really important too. And so for the last few months, we have been doing drills, and they will at least be done annually, if not quarterly, so that they're not taking out the sat phone for the first time when this happens.
The other part too is MSCs are charged with having regional business centers. And this is clearly one of those items that we need to make sure is visible. It's run by our 2 SESers, and it has all the functional areas, and the districts participate. So as business decisions are made, we understand, okay, here are the impacts and ramifications of those decisions. It is all business decisions, how to continue our business in light of a catastrophic event, so that if and when it does happen, it isn't grinding gears. We can start shifting gears. It may be a little slow, but at least it's not a cold start.
You say, to continue our business, but I do have like a kind of aside here, a related note. So for the Corps of Engineers, our Western Processing Center is also in Portland. So, I mean, that seems problematic to me if there is a large event like this.
Yes.
And they just moved it further west. So, which is, and we've had an experience here recently in the last couple of weeks where CFMs went down in the Western Processing Center, and half of USACE was without the ability for about 3 or 4 days of processing any type of transactions or anything like that. The RM community was actually looking at having to do emergency pay. So, yes, you're right. I think the jury's still out on this. We've been trying to articulate our concerns, and every time something happens, we get a little bit of a different story. It went from the Central Processing Center in Vicksburg, well, it backs up and mirrors the Western Processing Center. We found that's not the case. And more to follow on that. More is needed.
There will definitely be impacts that we can't even plan for.
Those unknowns.
Yes, there's so many unknowns, but we can just take the lessons learned from past events and try to apply them. We are doing a big exercise this June in 2016. I'm sure we're going to uncover processes that we need to think about a little bit more closely as a result of this exercise. I know that I've been keeping Hurricane Katrina in the back of my mind and the Corps of Engineers' response to that as I've been going through the Cascadia planning process. In Katrina, our New Orleans district was hit really hard. And there were, a lot of struggles in terms of responding to the stuff that we were responsible for when you have a district that's impacted. So that informed, a lot of my questions and concerns in this Cascadia process. So I think as other events happen, hopefully before this one, we can apply lessons learned from other events and figure out how to make the Western Processing Center more resilient, or make sure that the Central Processing Center is truly ready to support the Corps in, its greatest time of need. And yes, because money is very important.
Well, just to wrap up, I did want to touch on the exercise because Cascadia Rising, as you said, is coming up in early June, and it's a huge exercise. It's not just Corps of Engineers. So tell me a little bit about Cascadia Rising.
It's a regional exercise. It encompasses 3 states, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. I think you got over 50 counties involved. Tribes are involved. Numerous federal agencies are also involved in this. But again, it's a regional exercise. It's not a national level exercise like we see with New Madrid or Alaska Shield.
But effectively, there's a lot of national players involved.
There's a lot of players in this. But going back to your question, I'm sorry. How do we see the exercise coming back out?
No, I just wanted you to kind of explain, just lay the land out of the exercise.
So the exercise for us will be about 90% internally focused. We will have play with FEMA Region 10. Their scope will be focused primarily down to the state and local level, and less so more into the ESF3 piece. There'll be some play, but for us, it's more of an internal exercise on our development of both Portland and Seattle District to Walla Walla, and from NWD headquarters to Omaha District. Kansas City and Little Rock will play a little bit, but not extensively as far as the ESF3 portion. So it's 3.5 days. We have, 155 measles injects or more right now, truly testing out the communications ability to send reports via sat phone. And it's really trying to work in that fog of war where you're trying to develop a situation based on partial information, trying to identify the status. The big two items that are always happening, accountability and what's your project status look like, and then identifying what resources you need. So I think even though it's 3.5 days, it's going to be pretty busy 3.5 days. And of course, these things have a life of their own. So even though we have 155 injects, for every question, there's about another 20 questions that'll come out from various folks that you got to respond to.
And the local county level, I think they're largely focused on some of the life-saving aspects that are going to occur during an event and how do they communicate their needs to the state. That's kind of why we're more internally focused of how do we make sure that our devolution's occurring so that when they do articulate a need for federal assistance and ESF3 support, our ducks are in a row in our own house so that we can respond. We know who's supposed to assume that role and responsibility. A lot of these counties are small that are playing, and they might have one or two people as their emergency manager part-time, and the state's EOC capacities are limited too, and their breadth of experience has been maybe wildfires, but never really large-scale events that impact millions of people, hundreds of counties, hundreds of jurisdictions. So it will be a very big challenge for them just to learn how to communicate to their own neighbors and partners. And I think hopefully they'll learn how to connect to the federal level and understand what resources and assistance the feds can offer. Hopefully that will be the end result.
And for us too, this is the first time we'll fully exercise our plan. We've done about 2 exercises so far, lower level. The end result is to go back and relook at our plan, identify the gaps and other areas that we need to improve upon and build on that some more. The intent is to continuously improve, and what do we need to do again for another exercise?
So guys, let's switch now and just to wrap up our podcast here, but let's switch to personal preparedness. So if people are listening to this and they think, well, gee, I am in the affected area or potentially affected area. I live in Portland. Maybe I should start thinking about getting ready. What are some things they can do, some steps they can take to get ready for an earthquake in this area?
FEMA, the Red Cross, state EOCs, they actually have really good websites with lots of information on what you can do to be prepared. For a situation like this, the typical 72-hour level of preparedness is not enough. I think all the experts really agree on that. Me personally, I've got 15 gallons of water in my outdoor shed. I've got shelter, extra change of clothes, hygiene items, food. I think I need more water still. And it's in a place that's accessible that even if the shed falls down, it's not like it's in the basement of my house and I can't get to it. So, and another aspect that the preparedness officials really recommend is to have an emergency communications plan with your family, both the family inside the impacted area as well as outside. I don't really have that one covered personally because a lot of my family's outside the impacted area and I don't have a sat phone unless I borrow one from work. But it's going to be a challenge, and I think that every little bit that you can do to prepare today for you and your family to make it through a couple weeks is very important.
The value in this whole planning piece, everybody's been very participative. All the staff, right? This isn't just the EM staff doing it, readiness staff. This has been contracting, water management, our operations division to include navigation, hydropower, you name it. So what's been wonderful about this is it's been an all-hands-on-deck approach. The lessons learned out of this continue to astonish me. Regionalization used to be a very negative word about 5 years ago, but here folks are actually looking at this and saying, we need to be able to see each other's data, be able to see each other's information, work more collaboratively together. How do we do that? And what this has done from an organizational structure, business approach has really opened up doors and opened up eyes on the needs. And the intent is, in the future, future decisions, how do those get made, with all this in mind now? So this is an EM-only type of issue. It's truly a we thing. It's a team effort. So that's been a wonderful part of this whole process. The journey.
It's the journey, not the destination. Especially when the destination
we don't
is
want
this
the destination.
5.0 earthquake.
Let's not talk the destination.
All right, guys. Well, I just want to thank you so much. And just to let you know, we really appreciate you being here, John and Jennifer. And Cascadia is a big deal. Please care about it. So thanks again, guys.
Thank you for the opportunity.
That's all we have for today's episode. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you've learned something. Please subscribe to our feed and check back for future episodes. I'm Nadia Taylor, and this is Semper Gumby.